My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever could solve his riddle, so our family turned savage. Uncle Bartholomew was always the eccentric one, made his millions in tech, never married, lived alone in that massive Victorian mansion with 17 cats. When he died at 67, we expected the usual will reading, maybe some sentimental keepsakes divided among us cousins. Instead, his lawyer handed us a single sheet of paper. To my beloved family, who tolerated my peculiarities with remarkable patience. I've hidden something precious where memories dance with shadows, where the past whispers secrets to those brave enough to listen. The first to solve this riddle inherits everything, $47 million a house, all of it. Good luck, and may the best bloodline win. The room went dead silent. Then my aunt exploded. This is ridiculous, she said. Just divide the money equally like a normal person would. But Uncle Bartholomew was never normal. He once spent 3 years building an exact replica of his childhood bedroom in his basement. He collected vintage music boxes that played the same lullaby his mother sang to him. Everything he did connected to memory somehow. That first week, we were all friendly about it. We'd meet at his house, search together, share theories. Dad thought it meant the attic where Uncle Bartholomew kept family photos. My cousin Grace was convinced it was the library where he spent most of his time reading. My younger brother Freddie suggested the garden where Uncle Bartholomew buried his childhood pets. We even had a system. Each family would take a different section of the house each day. We'd document our findings, share discoveries over dinner. My aunt brought homemade sandwiches. Mom made her famous iced tea. It felt like a family vacation almost. We were treasure hunting together, working toward a common goal. But $47 million changes people. By week 2, the cooperation crumbled. I started noticing things. My aunt would arrive early and leave late, claiming she was just being thorough. Grace stopped sharing her theories, saying she needed more time to research. Dad became obsessed with Uncle Bartholomew's computer, spending hours trying to crack passwords we didn't even know existed. The breaking point came when I caught my aunt sneaking in at night with lockpicks. I'd come by to feed the cats, they were my unofficial responsibility since Uncle Bartholomew's death, and found her trying to Jimmy open his antique desk at 2 a.m., sweating and cursing under her breath. "What are you doing?" I whispered, not wanting to wake the neighbors. She looked up with wild eyes, hair disheveled, makeup smeared. "Everyone's doing it," she hissed. "Your dad hired a private investigator to research Uncle Bartholomew's past." Grace started withholding information, claiming she'd found clues she wouldn't share. "Your mother tried to bribe the housekeeper for inside information about his habits." I felt my stomach drop. Mom had what? The next morning, I confronted her at breakfast. She was sitting at our kitchen table, calmly reading the newspaper like nothing had changed. "Mom," I said, "did you try to bribe Mrs. Rodriguez?" She didn't even look up from her paper. "I offered her a little extra money for information about your uncle's routines." "That's not bribing, that's consulting." "That's exactly what bribing is," I said. She finally looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. $47 million, honey. That's enough to change everything. Pay off the house, send you to graduate school, secure our retirement. Don't pretend you're above this. I've seen you searching that house just as frantically as the rest of us. She was right. I wasn't above it. But I also wasn't above playing dirty. That night, I broke into Uncle Bartholomew's study. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, but always with permission. Now I was creeping around with a flashlight, feeling like a criminal in a house that had always felt like a second home. I started with his desk, the same one my aunt had been trying to pick. The drawers were locked, but I knew Uncle Bartholomew kept spare keys in weird places. I found one taped under his keyboard and started methodically going through his files. Most of it was boring financial stuff. Investment statements, tax documents, correspondence with his lawyers. But hidden in the very back of the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled Family Secrets. Inside were documents that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. Birth certificates with different names. A DNA test showing Dad wasn't biologically related to my grandfather. Medical records from my grandfather's final months that contradicted everything we'd been told about his death. Financial documents showing systematic theft from his accounts in the weeks before he died. And at the bottom of the pile, a note in Uncle Bartholomew's careful handwriting. "Someone in this family killed my brother. Find the truth. Find the treasure." My grandfather, Uncle Bartholomew's brother, had died when I was 5. We were told it was a heart attack, a peaceful death in his sleep. But these medical records told a different story. 3 different doctors had documented suspicious symptoms. Nausea that couldn't be explained, irregular heartbeat that didn't match his previous condition, confusion and disorientation that seemed to come and go. A nurse had filed reports about irregular medication dosages that were later dismissed by the attending physician. The financial documents were equally damning. In the 6 months before my grandfather's death, someone had been slowly draining his accounts. Forged signatures on withdrawal slips. Money transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. Large cash withdrawals that my grandfather claimed he didn't remember making. I sat in Uncle Bartholomew's leather chair, surrounded by his cats, trying to process what I discovered. The ginger tabby, Fitzgerald, jumped onto my lap and started purring. He'd always been Uncle Bartholomew's favorite, and somehow his presence made me feel less alone with this terrible knowledge. This wasn't just about solving a riddle anymore. This was about uncovering a 30-year-old murder. I photographed everything with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. As I was carefully replacing the folder, I noticed something else, a loose floorboard under Uncle Bartholomew's desk. It looked like it had been disturbed recently. When I pried it up with a letter opener, I found a small metal box containing a key and an address I didn't recognize. The address was for a storage unit across town, but I couldn't investigate that tonight. I needed to think about what I discovered, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. The next morning, I called a family meeting. Everyone gathered in Uncle Bartholomew's living room. Mom, Dad, my aunt, Grace, and Freddie. The tension was immediately obvious. Grace hadn't spoken to my aunt in 3 days after catching her trying to break into the basement. Dad looked exhausted from staying up all night researching property records and old newspaper archives. Mom kept glancing around the room like she was looking for hidden cameras or listening devices. Freddie, usually the family peacekeeper, looked stressed and uncomfortable. He'd started working extra shifts at the hospital where he was doing his residency, claiming he needed to focus on his career. But I suspected he was just avoiding the family drama. "I have something to show you all," I announced. Before I could continue, my aunt stood up abruptly. "We need to set some ground rules first," she said. "This treasure hunt is tearing our family apart. I say we split into teams, work more efficiently, maybe set up a schedule so we're not all stepping on each other's toes." My mother laughed bitterly. "Teams? You mean so you can manipulate whoever you're paired with? Control the information flow? No thank you. I work better alone." Dad slammed his fist on the coffee table, making everyone jump. One of the cats fled upstairs. "Enough. This is exactly what Bartholomew wanted. He's turning us against each other from the grave, making us suspicious and paranoid. We're family, for Christ's sake." "Maybe that was his point," I said quietly. "Maybe he wanted us to see who we really are when there's something valuable at stake." I pulled out my phone and showed them the birth certificate first. Dad's face went completely white as he read his own name next to parents he'd never heard of. "What is this?" he whispered. "It means you're not actually Grandpa's biological son," I said. "You were adopted when you were 3 years old, after your real parents died in a car accident, which means you might not have any legal claim to Uncle Bartholomew's inheritance anyway." The room erupted. My aunt started screaming about fraud and forgery. Mom demanded to see the original documents. Grace accused me of manufacturing evidence to eliminate competition, but Dad just sat there, staring at the paper with devastated eyes. "I never knew," he said finally. "All these years, he never told me I was adopted. I called him Dad. I thought I belonged." Freddie moved to sit beside him, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You do belong," he said firmly. "Adopted or not, you're still our father. This doesn't change anything, but it did change everything, because if Dad wasn't legally my grandfather's son, then none of us had any biological claim to the family money. We were all outsiders now." "There's more," I said, and showed them the medical records. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace grabbed the papers and studied them with wide eyes. She was in her 3rd year of medical school and understood the implications better than the rest of us. "These symptoms," she said slowly. "The timeline, the pattern of deterioration. This looks like chronic poisoning. Probably something that would be hard to detect in a routine autopsy, especially 30 years ago when testing methods weren't as advanced." Freddie, who'd been silent until now, suddenly stood up. "This is insane. We're talking about murder. In our family. Someone needs to call the police right now." "With what evidence?" my aunt said, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "We have 30-year-old medical records that prove nothing definitively. We'd look like idiots. Or worse, like we're trying to deflect suspicion from ourselves. But I could see the wheels turning in everyone's heads. If someone in the family had murdered my grandfather, that someone was sitting in this room right now." We all started looking at each other differently, searching for signs of guilt or deception. "Are you saying Uncle Bartholomew thought so?" Mom asked quietly. "I'm saying Uncle Bartholomew believed it enough to spend 30 years investigating. And he left us this riddle to find the proof." The family meeting stopped after that. Everyone retreated to their corners, suspicious and afraid, but I couldn't let it go. That night, I drove to the address I'd found with the key. The storage unit was in a rundown facility on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people hide things they don't want found. Unit 47B was small and dusty, but it contained Uncle Bartholomew's real investigation, boxes and boxes of documents, photographs, interview transcripts, maps and timelines covering the walls. He'd turned this storage unit into a detective's war room, and he'd been working on it for decades. There were medical reports from 3 different doctors who treated my grandfather in his final months. Each one had documented concerns about his symptoms, but none had been willing to suggest foul play. There was testimony from a nurse who'd been fired for asking too many questions about his medication schedule. She'd tried to raise concerns about unauthorized changes to his prescriptions, but had been dismissed as a troublemaker. The financial records were even more damning. Uncle Bartholomew had traced every suspicious transaction in my grandfather's accounts. Forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, money transferred to dummy accounts that had been quickly closed after my grandfather's death. But the most damaging evidence was photographic. Uncle Bartholomew had somehow obtained security footage from my grandfather's assisted living facility. Hours and hours of recordings showing family members visiting during his final months, including several videos of my mother, alone with him, on days when she'd told the rest of us she was out of town. The timestamps were devastating. Mom visiting every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 weeks before his death. Mom sitting by his bedside, holding cups of tea and medication. Mom adjusting his pill dispenser when the nurses weren't looking. Mom whispering in his ear while he slept. There was also a journal in Uncle Bartholomew's handwriting, documenting his growing suspicions. March 3rd. Found mother's earring in father's room. She said she hadn't visited in over a week. Nurse confirmed she was there yesterday. March 15th. Nurse mentioned someone had been adjusting father's medication schedule. Family members aren't supposed to have access to the locked dispenser. March 23rd. Father's savings account shows withdrawals he can't remember making. Signature looks shaky, different from his usual writing. March 28th. Father complaining of nausea after family visits. Doctors can't find a cause. March 31st. Father died. Doctor said heart attack, but symptoms don't match his previous cardiac episodes. Requesting second opinion. April 15th. Second autopsy inconclusive. Too much time passed. Evidence degraded. Body already cremated per family wishes. April 22nd. Police won't investigate further. Case closed. But I know someone killed him. I can feel it. The journal entries continued for years. Uncle Bartholomew had never stopped investigating. He'd hired private detectives, consulted medical experts, even tried to get the case reopened multiple times. But without concrete proof, no one would listen to him. He'd become obsessed, and it had cost him relationships. I remembered now how isolated he'd become after my grandfather's death, how he'd stopped coming to family gatherings unless specifically invited, how he'd seemed sad and distracted whenever we visited. We'd all thought he was just grieving. In reality, he'd been living with the knowledge that someone in his family was a killer. I spent the entire night in that storage unit reading through his evidence. By morning, I had a clear picture of what had happened. Someone had been slowly poisoning my grandfather with his own heart medication, increasing the dosage just enough to cause the symptoms documented by the doctors, but not enough to trigger immediate suspicion. They'd also been forging his signature to steal money from his accounts, probably planning to inherit the rest anyway. And based on the security footage and financial records, that someone was my mother. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to be absolutely certain before I destroyed my family. I spent the next 2 days cross-referencing everything Uncle Bartholomew had collected. I contacted the nurse who'd been fired. She was retired now, but she remembered my grandfather's case clearly. He was such a sweet man, she told me over the phone, but something wasn't right about his final weeks. His symptoms didn't match his diagnosis, and someone kept changing his medication schedule. When I tried to report it, the administration said I was overstepping my bounds. They let me go the next week. I also spoke with one of the doctors who'd treated my grandfather. He was cautious about discussing a case from 30 years ago, but he confirmed that the symptoms had been unusual. Heart failure doesn't typically present with those neurological symptoms, he said. We considered other possibilities, but the family was eager to avoid an autopsy, said the old man had suffered enough. The final piece of evidence came from Uncle Bartholomew's financial investigation. He tracked the forged withdrawals to a series of cash deposits in my mother's personal account. The timing was perfect. Each deposit occurred within 24 hours of a withdrawal from my grandfather's account. I had everything I needed. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I confronted her that night at her house. She was in the kitchen, making dinner like nothing had changed. Like we hadn't just discovered evidence of murder in our family. She was humming while she chopped vegetables, completely at peace. I know what you did, I said, spreading the photographs across her kitchen table. Mom's face cycled through shock, denial, then something that might have been relief. You found it all, didn't you? She said finally. Your uncle's little investigation. I always wondered when someone would stumble across it. So you admit it? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't admit anything, but I'm not surprised Bartholomew spent his life playing detective instead of accepting reality. What reality? I asked. She sat down across from me, suddenly looking older than her 58 years. The reality that your grandfather was going to change his will, cut everyone out except Bartholomew. We would have gotten nothing. 30 years of caring for him, visiting him, pretending to love that miserable old man, and for what? So his precious younger son could inherit everything while the rest of us struggled? So you killed him? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs. I didn't kill him. I just helped him along. He was suffering anyway. Those heart medications were making him confused and sick. I simply made sure he took the right amount to ease his passing. More humane than letting him waste away in that nursing home for years. You poisoned him, I said. You forged his signature to steal his money. You murdered your own father-in-law. Her eyes hardened. I protected our family's future. Your future. Do you think your college education paid for itself? Do you think this house just magically appeared? Everything good in your life came from that money, from my decisions. But it wasn't yours to take, I said. She shrugged like we were discussing what to have for dinner. It should have been. I was the one who took care of him when he got sick. I was the one who visited every week, brought him meals, pretended to enjoy his boring stories about the old days. Your father was too weak to do what needed to be done. Someone had to be practical. I stared at the woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me right from wrong, who'd tucked me in every night with stories about brave princesses who always did the right thing. Uncle Bartholomew knew, didn't he? I said. That's why he never trusted you. Why he never invited you to family dinners unless Dad insisted. Why he seemed so sad and distant after Grandpa died. She nodded slowly. He suspected from the beginning, especially after he found those medical records. Smart man, your uncle. Too smart for his own good. I think he's been planning this ridiculous treasure hunt for years, hoping someone would uncover the truth. Typical Bartholomew, too cowardly to confront me directly, but clever enough to make us destroy ourselves looking for answers. What happens now? I asked. She looked at me with pleading eyes. Nothing has to happen. You found the evidence. You solved the riddle. The money is yours. All of it. We can finally move on. Put this behind us. Your grandfather is dead anyway. Bringing this up now won't change anything except destroying what's left of our family. I realized she still didn't understand. This was never about the money. I had recorded our entire conversation on my phone. That night, I called Detective Morrison, the officer who'd originally investigated my grandfather's death. He was retired now, living in Arizona, but he remembered the case clearly. Something always bothered me about that one, he told me over the phone. The family was so insistent it was natural causes. Refused an autopsy, had the body cremated immediately. We get suspicious families all the time, but usually they're demanding investigations, not trying to avoid them. The next morning, I drove to the police station and turned over everything. Uncle Bartholomew's evidence, the photographs, the security footage, my recording of Mom's confession. Detective Morrison had flown back to help with the case, and he studied it all with the careful attention of someone who'd been waiting 30 years for this moment. "This is substantial," he said finally. "More than enough to reopen the case. Enough to make arrests. Your uncle did good work, professional-level investigation. But before any of that happened, I had to tell my family. I called another meeting at Uncle Bartholomew's house. This time, everyone came. Even my mother, though she looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. I've solved the riddle," I announced. Grace leaned forward eagerly. "Where was it? What did he hide? Is it in the house somewhere?" I looked around the room at these people I'd loved my entire life. My aunt, who'd taught me to braid my hair and bought me my first training bra. Dad, who'd coached my little league team and stayed up all night helping me with science fair projects. Freddie, who'd protected me from bullies in middle school and driven me to prom when my date got food poisoning. Even Mom, who'd stayed up all night when I had the flu, reading me stories until I fell asleep. In 3 days, I was going to destroy them all. The treasure wasn't hidden in the house, I said. It was hidden in the truth. Uncle Bartholomew discovered that someone in this family murdered Grandpa, and he left us this riddle to find the evidence that would prove it. The room went silent except for the ticking of Uncle Bartholomew's antique grandfather clock. Mom's face was stone, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "That's impossible," my aunt said. "Dad died of a heart attack. We were all there. You saw what someone wanted you to see," I interrupted. But Uncle Bartholomew found medical records proving Grandpa was poisoned. Financial documents showing someone was stealing from him. Security footage of the killer visiting him when they claimed to be elsewhere. Dad stood up slowly, his face pale. "Who?" he asked, though I think he already knew. I looked directly at my mother. "Mom." The explosion of denials and accusations that followed was immediate and vicious. My aunt screamed that I was lying, that I was trying to frame Mom to eliminate competition for the inheritance. Freddie demanded to see proof, accused me of manufacturing evidence. Grace started crying, saying this couldn't be happening. Dad just stood there, staring at Mom with an expression of dawning horror. But Mom didn't deny it. She just sat there looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the weight of 30 years of secrets was finally crushing her. Finally, she spoke. "I did what I had to do for this family. Your grandfather was a selfish old man who would have left us with nothing. Everything we have, everything we've accomplished, came from that decision. I won't apologize for protecting my children." Dad sank back into his chair. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, it's true. You really did it." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Grace ran out of the house crying. My aunt started screaming about calling lawyers. Freddie tried to play peacekeeper, suggesting we could handle this privately, as a family, but it was too late for that. 3 days later, Detective Morrison and 2 other officers arrived at Mom's house with an arrest warrant. I wasn't there, but Freddie told me later that she went quietly. She'd been expecting it. Mom was charged with first-degree murder, elder abuse, and financial fraud. The story made national news. Wealthy tech executives' elaborate treasure hunt exposes family murder. Reporters camped outside our houses for weeks. The story had everything: family secrets, hidden treasure, a decades-old mystery solved from beyond the grave. Dad filed for divorce immediately. He couldn't look at her, couldn't be in the same room. The knowledge that his entire adult life had been built on blood money was destroying him. He started seeing a therapist, trying to process 30 years of lies. Grace stopped speaking to our entire branch of the family. She blamed me for destroying everything, for not just keeping the secret and taking the money. She moved to California for a fellowship and sent Dad a letter saying she needed time to figure out who she was, if her whole family history was a lie. My aunt moved to Florida without saying goodbye. She'd always been dramatic, but this was too much even for her. Freddie tried to stay neutral, but eventually chose sides, not mine. He thought I should have found a way to handle it privately, protect the family reputation. I was completely alone. The trial lasted 8 months. Mom's defense team was expensive and thorough. They tried to argue that the evidence was too old, too circumstantial. They claimed Uncle Bartholomew had been mentally unstable, obsessed with conspiracy theories. They suggested I had manufactured the confession recording, but Uncle Bartholomew's documentation was too thorough to dismiss. The medical experts testified that the symptoms were consistent with chronic cardiac glycoside poisoning, exactly what would happen if someone gradually increased a heart patient's medication. The handwriting analyst confirmed that the signatures on the withdrawal slips were forgeries. The security footage was authenticated by multiple experts, and my recording of Mom's confession was clear and unambiguous. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. During her sentencing, Mom was given the opportunity to make a final statement. She looked directly at me from across the courtroom. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You destroyed our family for a dead man who never cared about any of us anyway. Your uncle was a bitter, lonely old fool who couldn't accept that sometimes people die. And you're just like him, so obsessed with your precious truth that you threw away everyone who actually loved you." She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But that wasn't true about Uncle Bartholomew. He hadn't been bitter or lonely. He'd been haunted. For 30 years, he'd lived with the knowledge that someone in his family was a killer. He'd tried to protect us while still seeking justice for his brother. The riddle hadn't been revenge. It had been a final attempt to set things right. The inheritance, when it was finally settled, felt meaningless. $47 million that I'd never wanted in the first place. Blood money, twice over now. I donated most of it to organizations that protect elderly people from abuse. I kept enough to pay off my student loans and buy a small house. And I kept Uncle Bartholomew's Victorian mansion because someone had to take care of his cats. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, like a weight has been lifted. The cats seem happier too. They've stopped hiding in corners and now follow me around like I'm their new favorite person. Fitzgerald, the ginger tabby, has claimed my bed as his personal domain. Sometimes I swear I can hear Uncle Bartholomew's approving chuckle echoing through the halls. I still get letters from family members occasionally. Dad writes every few months trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. He's in therapy, working through his anger and grief. He wants to understand how he missed the signs, how he lived with a murderer for 30 years without knowing it. Grace sent a card last Christmas, just a generic holiday greeting, but she'd signed it with her full name, which felt significant. She's working at a children's hospital now, specializing in pediatric oncology, saving lives instead of taking them. Even my aunt reached out once, calling from Florida to say she'd been thinking about me. The conversation was awkward and stilted, but she ended by saying she understood why I'd done what I did. That took courage. But I never write back to Mom. She sends letters from prison sometimes, pages and pages of justification and self-pity. She still insists she was protecting our family, still believes she was the victim in all of this. Still thinks I should have kept her secret and been grateful for the blood money. I throw them away without reading them. Because Uncle Bartholomew taught me something important in death that he couldn't teach me in life. The truth is always worth more than the lie, no matter how much it costs. Justice is worth more than family loyalty. And sometimes, the people who claim to love you are the ones you need protection from most. I've started a new tradition in Uncle Bartholomew's house. Every year on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, I light a candle in his memory and read one of Uncle Bartholomew's journals out loud to the cats. It seems fitting that the truth finally got told in the house where it was hidden for so long. The riddle is solved. The treasure is found. And for the first time in 30 years, my grandfather can rest in peace. Uncle Bartholomew always said the truth was worth more than gold. He was right. But the cost of that truth was everything I thought I knew about my family, everyone I thought loved me, and every memory I treasured from my childhood. Some treasures are worth finding. Others destroy everything you hold dear in the process. I'm still learning to live with the difference.